So let's keep going with our handler. And as you're going to see, it takes a fair bit of work to set up a GraphQL backend. And it's kind of a trade-off. If you want people on the front end to do less work, you're going to have to do more work on the back end. But it's not that difficult. So far, all we're doing right now in this handler is populating our movies variable, our package level variable movies. And that's the data we're going to query using GraphQL. So we just call our backend, our all method, get all the movies into a slice, and then we read the request body, which comes in the form of a JSON file, and we're just logging it. And now we need to do something with that query. So let's get started. First thing you have to do is specify a root query. And I'm going to create a local variable called root query, which is assigned the value of, from the GraphQL package, we're going to call object config. We're configuring an object. And that takes, in curly brackets, a name, which I'm going to call root query, like that. And it takes fields, and that's just our local variable fields. So now we have our root query. Now we need to create a schema config, which I'll call schema config. And again, that's a variable name of my choice. And again, from the GraphQL package, we're going to call the method schema config. And that takes query, which in this case will be a GraphQL.newObject, and I'm passing it the value root query, the variable we created on the line just before this one. So now we have our schema config. And finally, we actually get the schema we can work with, which I'll call schema. And we're checking for an error, and that comes from GraphQL.newSchema, and we hand it schema config. And we check for an error. If error is not equal to nil, I'll just say app.errorJSON, and I'll hand it the response writer and errors.new, and I'll just put in failed to create schema, and I'll log the error. Log.println error, and I'll return. And I guess I need to import the errors package, but I'll let my IDE do that. Errors. And new has a capital N. There. So now we have our schema. At this point, we have to see what are the params we're getting in our request. And we do that again by creating a local variable, params. And that's assigned the value of GraphQL.params. And we configure that by saying schema is schema. And the request string, which is something it requires, is our actual query, what we got back up on line 89. So we're finally handling our GraphQL request. And we get a response. A response is assigned the value of GraphQL.do, and we hand it params. So now we have a response, and we check for errors. So the way you check for errors here is by saying if the length, not left, if the len of resp.errors is greater than 0, then we have at least one error. And again, I'll just call app.errorJSON, and I'll hand it the response writer, and I'll give it a new error, errors.new, and I'll just say format.sprintf failed, and then I'll just put in the errors, %+v, and just print whatever you have there, resp.errors. Okay, and I got too many parentheses here. Sloppy typing today. And import the format package. Okay, now if we get past that, we're actually going to get a response we can send back in the form of JSON. So I'll declare a new variable, j, and I'm going to ignore the error. And we just say json.marshal, and I'll say marshal indent so we can actually look at it in the log file and it will be readable. And we're going to marshal resp with no prefix and a few spaces. And we'll write that to the end user, w.header.set content-type. It's going to be in the form of application/JSON. and w.writeHeader, and we'll write status OK, http.status OK, and we'll write to the response writer, w.write j. Okay, so if this compiles, and hopefully it will, go run cmd/API, then our backend should now be set up to handle one kind of request. And again, the only kind we're handling right now is from our two available ones in the fields in our schema definition. We're going to listen for either a movie, which returns one movie, or list, which returns all of the movies. Okay, so the next step is to go to our front end and write the necessary JavaScript and JSX and so forth to make the request. And we'll take care of that in the next lecture.